Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is the former president of the United Nations Human Rights Council and has served as Germany's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva. Please do join me in giving a resoundingly warm welcome to Ambassador Rucker.
سفیر یواخیم روکر، رئیس شورای حقوق بشر ملل متحد 2015. من به طور کامل از مبارزه برای ایران آزاد، دموکراتیک و مبتنی بر جدایی دین و دولت حمایت می کنم. وقت آن رسیده است که اتحادیه اروپا سپاه پاسداران را به عنوان یک سازمان تروریستی لیست گذاری کند. تلاش اخیر رژیم برای محاکمه 104 عضو و رهبر سازمان مجاهدین خلق با اتهامات تروریستی جعلی، تلاشی بی پرده برای گسترش سرکوب فراتر از مرزهای ایران است و باید توسط جامعه بین المللی محکوم شود.
Madam President, dear guests, distinguished participants at this conference, I fully support the struggle for a free, democratic and secular Iran. And that's what we're all here for, isn't it? I also wholeheartedly support the struggle for justice for the victims of the 1988 massacres and your struggle against the regime's ongoing and scandalous violations of human rights and its connected crimes, including, as the Swedish courts have recently confirmed in the case of Hamid Nouri, crimes against international law. I believe it is high time for the EU to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Apart from that, let me also, in my capacity as former president of the UNHRC, stress that I'm satisfied in general with how the UN is responding to the challenge of naming and shaming what is actually happening inside Iran. I think we have seen reasonable resolutions of the General Assembly. But in particular, of course, I think we can be very proud of the work of the UN Special Rapporteur on Iran. It has already been mentioned that Professor Javid Rehman now published or talked about a new landmark report in which he concluded that the 1988 massacre of thousands of political prisoners in Iran amounted to crimes against humanity, and it is reported that he also mentioned genocide. I think this report needs to be out there for the public to see what the Special Rapporteur has found, and we are very grateful to him. I also think that the international fact-finding mission on the Islamic Republic of Iran is doing a reasonable job in finding what it should find, and it is very good that the report and 2024 report was actually adopted, and it's very good that the mandate of this mechanism was also now extended for another year, which is very important. I would also mention briefly that another important issue, which is not about the UN, but it's about international law and jurisdiction. I think the regime's recent attempt to prosecute 104 exiled members and leaders of the PMOI on fabricated terrorism charges is a blatant attempt to extend its suppression beyond Iranian borders, and it should be condemned by the international community. Now, what should we do? What is the way forward? I think we have to continue to demand thorough and impartial investigations in the past crimes and the ongoing crimes of the regime. It is very unfortunate that Hamid Nouri was actually extradited in this infamous exchange. However, we should not forget that the Stockholm sentence in the second instance of the courts was actually a very, very good development, thanks to Mark Ellis and others who have supported this, because it showed that the universal law application is actually working. And I think the Swedish courts should be commended for that. And of course, the text of the sentence is very enlightening. What else should we do? We should ensure and continue to demand accountability of the regime. The crimes should not go unpunished, and we should extend our support for the victims and the families, and we should shine a light on ongoing abuses. Of course, we also need a diplomatic process. We need pressure from the international community, including, as I've said in the beginning, things like listing the IRCG as a terrorist group. And politically, the way forward can be along the lines of the famous 10 points, which contain all the right substance to come to a free and democratic and secular Iran as soon as possible, and sometimes things go faster than you would expect. Thank you very much for listening to me, and all the best.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to introduce our next speaker, a renowned international criminal law expert. Dr. Mark Ellis is the Executive Director of the International Bar Association and the former chair of the United Nations Advisory Panel on matters relating to Defense Council of the Mechanism for International Criminal Tribunals. Please do join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Ellis.
مارک الیس، مدیر اجرایی کانون وکلای بین المللی. برای من به عنوان یک وکیل بین المللی، نقض حقوق بشر در ایران به سطح جنایات علیه بشریت و نسل کشی رسیدند. گزارش جاوید رحمان نشان می‌دهد قتل عام 1988 جنایت علیه بشریت و نسل کشی بوده است. به همین دلیل این کشتار را به سطح صلاحیت جهانی در سراسر جهان ارتقا می‌دهد تا کسانی که این جنایات را مرتکب شده‌اند به عدالت سپرده شوند.
Madam President, guests, it's a great honor to be here. I want to start by the need to remember the victims of repression that were killed by the Iranian security forces. We shall never and should never forget these individuals. Make no mistake about it, that the authorities in Iran are responsible for these serious violations of international law and the deaths that have occurred time and time again in the country. The use of unnecessary force, the use of arbitrary detention, torture, ill treatment, murder are all the very most egregious violations of international law. Most importantly for me as an international lawyer, that they have reached the level of crimes against humanity and genocide. These are the most egregious of all the atrocity crimes, and they say much of what's happening in Iran. They are part of a widespread and systematic policy and attack by the government against civilians, namely and particularly, as we have seen, women and those political activists that remain against the government of Iran. The special rapporteur, which the ambassador mentioned, is exceedingly important in international law. And the reason is it sets forth that the 1988 massacre was in fact crimes against humanity and genocide. And the reason this is important, because it elevates this massacre to the level of universal jurisdiction across the world. And universal jurisdiction focuses on the most heinous crimes. And this report clarifies that that massacre reached that level of atrocities. And in doing so, under the concept of universal jurisdiction, every state has a duty, a responsibility to ensure those who have perpetrated these crimes are brought to justice. The universal jurisdiction focuses on the crimes themselves. This is the focus, and this is why it's important for states to continue to interact and to engage and to support and to embed this concept of universal jurisdiction. It is true, as the ambassador said, Sweden, which had set forth a remarkable precedent in the use of universal jurisdiction, that the process ultimately failed. That is unfortunate. I don't believe that any individual who has been found guilty of atrocity crimes, such as crimes against humanity, genocide, should ever be part of a political bargaining chip for any matter. But let us remember as we go forward in this legal journey that there is no statute of limitations for these types of crimes. And we have seen recently the use of universal jurisdiction, particularly in Syria. In Syria, countries such as Austria, France, Germany, Hungary, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, have all used universal jurisdiction to focus attention on the atrocities committed in Syria. The same must be done in Iran. And we are witnessing a rebirth of universal jurisdiction for the international community to embrace the concept of universal jurisdiction, to ensure that those who have perpetrated the most heinous crimes understand that eventually they will be brought to justice. If not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then sometime in the future, because that is what's required under international law. And that is what we must do in focusing on the atrocities that have been committed in Iran. Let us reinforce our commitment as an international community to ensure that those that have committed these crimes are brought to justice. Accountability is critical. Impunity, as Madam President said, is not an alternative. Accountability must be the focus of the international community to ensure that those who have committed the crimes and continue to commit the crimes in Iran are eventually brought to justice. This must be our mission. Thank you very much.
اینگمار شیلستروم، نماینده پارلمان سوئد: من اقدامات رژیم ایران علیه مخالفان خود مستقر در آلبانی را به شدت محکوم می کنم و بر حقوق آنها طبق کنوانسیون ژنو و کنوانسیون اروپایی تاکید می کنم. از آنجایی که رژیم ایران همه راه‌های سیاسی برای تغییر را بسته است، باید جهان آزاد حق مردم ایران برای قیام و مقاومت برای ایجاد تغییر را به رسمیت بشناسد.
Mitt namn är Ingemar Kihlström och jag är riksdagsledamot i Sveriges riksdag. För mig är en sann demokrati det är viktigt att lyfta fram vikten av de mänskliga rättigheterna och att det ska få genomslag i hela vår värld för varje person. Men faktum är att många av världens medborgare lever utan den rätt till frihet och utan de rättigheter som vi finner självklara här i Sverige och i västvärlden. Genom ert arbete lyfter ni situationen i Iran. Min och mitt partis tydliga åsikt att det måste ske en förändring så att demokrati och frihet ska gälla för människor i Iran så att de kan leva i frihet och med verklig demokrati enligt de rättigheter som FN definierat. Det styre vi ser idag i Iran visar genom sitt agerande på motsatsen till det som både jag, ni och resten av världen vill se för ett fritt demokratiskt land. Jag fördömer också kraftfullt den iranska regimens åtgärder mot oppositionella iranier i Albanien och bekräftar deras rättigheter enligt Genèvekonventionen och Europakonventionen. Eftersom den iranska regimen har blockerat alla politiska vägar till förändring måste den fria världen erkänna iranska folkets rätt att göra uppror och motstånd för att åstadkomma en förändring. Jag fördömer också kraftfullt den iranska regimens destruktiva roll i Mellanöstern med dess krigiska politik och jag kräver en terrorklassning av IRGC och införandet av ytterligare sanktioner mot regimen. Genom ert arbete synliggör ni situationen i Iran. Jag ger mitt stöd till NCRIs 10-punktsplan för en sekulär demokratisk republik i Iran och uppmanar alla världens regeringar att göra likadant. Jag vill visa min uppskattning för det arbete ni bedriver för att förändra situationen i Iran. Och jag vill också i mitt riksdagsuppdrag verka för att Iran, likt många andra länder, förändras så att vi kan se att alla kvinnor och män kan få uppleva en frihet att göra egna livsval och välja demokratiska företrädare utan inskränkning av rättigheterna. Min avslutande hälsning blir därför: vi måste tillsammans arbeta för att åstadkomma en förändring så att de mänskliga rättigheterna gäller överallt, inte minst i Iran. Jag lovar att fortsätta mitt engagemang för att folket i Iran ska få uppleva frihet och demokrati och jag önskar er framgång i ett arbete för att förändra situationen i Iran. Tack så mycket.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my immense personal pleasure to introduce to you Ambassador Harper, who is the distinguished former US Ambassador to the United Nations Human Rights Council. Ambassador Harper's advocacy for human rights on the global stage has been exemplary, and we are most grateful that he joins us here this afternoon. Thank you.
کیت هارپر، سفیر پیشین آمریکا در شورای حقوق بشر سازمان ملل. جهان در سالهای اخیر با شگفتی به زنان و مردان شجاع ایران نگاه کرده است که علیه این رژیم تظاهرات کرده‌اند. فهم قتل عام سال 67 و دیگر جنایات رژیم نشان دهنده شجاعت محض این معترضان است. جهان در حال برداشتن گام‌هایی برای ایجاد پاسخگویی در مقابل نقض سیستماتیک حقوق بشر در ایران است.
Madam President, colleagues, old friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to see a free Iran as soon as possible. I'd like to see a democratic Iran as soon as possible. I'd like to see an Iran that does not discriminate against women and fully empowers them in their society as soon as possible. And my focus today is on the human rights situation in Iran and the gross and systematic violations that have occurred under this present regime since its inception. For myself, I was aware of the 1988 executions and massacre, but I did not fully understand the gravity and the sheer depravity of it. And let me be clear, once I've learned more about it, what became unmistakably clear is that the cruelty involved was not a byproduct. The cruelty was the point. The cruelty was the point when the way they treated the victims and they tortured them and they treated their families. The cruelty was the point because the cruelty was about breeding fear. Their goal was to silence. And that is the story that has to be told and is being told better each day. And so I welcome the efforts of those focused on bringing accountability, showing a spotlight on this incredible crime to so many, for merely sharing their point of view. Your work on this is righteous. You're giving voice to those who cannot speak for themselves. The efforts of yours is important for several reasons. It sends a loud and clear message that it is not too late for justice. But more people have to understand what happened, and here's why. And here's why it's important. And the simplest reason is that impunity breeds recurrence. Here, there is a sheer lack of accountability for those responsible for these atrocities. And that we know is what is there is a lack of adequate, where there is a lack of adequate accountability, there will be more crimes. And so there are, as we see. The world has watched in wonder in recent years in the courageous women and men of Iran as they have protested this regime. Understanding the 1988 massacre and the other atrocities before and since speaks volume about the sheer bravery of these protesters. They have not been cowed by the cruelty. Their protest is knowing of the consequences that they may face. That is true valor. And indeed, some have paid the ultimate price, as has been discussed earlier, a price for exercising these basic freedoms to speak their mind. We should recognize that in the recent years there have been successes in getting this word out about the massacre and the ongoing atrocities. As well, the world is taking steps to bring accountability in the face of more recent gross and systematic human rights violations in Iran. I was glad to see the Human Rights Council, which we served on, the body renew the mandate for the fact-finding mission. And obviously the Special Rapporteur has played in such a critical role at shining a spotlight here. Let me close on a hopeful note. My message is this: your efforts are worthwhile. Human rights promotion is hard work. It always takes longer than we'd like. But for a myriad of examples when accountability has come, my sense is that this regime in Iran is brittle. My hope is that a free Iran occurs sooner rather than later. But I'd like to tell you a story. When my good friend, Ambassador Ruker, was president of the Human Rights Council, it's a tradition for the president to invite the members of the council to his capital, and he did so in Berlin. And we did a tour of Berlin, and we came to the wall, and Joachim was sitting nearby, and I asked him, I said, you were here a couple years before the wall came down. When did you think the wall was coming down? And he said, not in my lifetime. He is one of the most astute political observers that I know, and many could not see it. And that's a strong message. The fact that we cannot predict it today does not mean that it will not happen soon. Thank you.